Welcome to the Poisoner's Almanac. I am your co-host, Adam.
I'm Rebecca.
And
that sounded really condescending how I said that. I'm Rebecca.
Say it again.
I'm Rebecca. Okay, that was bad. No. I'm Rebecca. Hi. How's it going?
Rebecca.
This is me. I'm here. I'm trying too hard this morning, I think.
Right. Welcome back, everybody. How have you been, my dear?
Well, it's Friday, so I'm happy about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a kind of a crazy week, but I feel like every week is a crazy week.
I mean, yeah.
So I don't even know why I say that like every week. It's like, why is she always tired? Because I am. Because I am.
That's right.
But my daughter got to school on time.
Oh,
and
big W.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully she can focus today.
Yes.
So.
I am still giggling about the fact that you were doing podcast research for this episode upstairs. I was downstairs, like getting ready to go to work. And I was, of course, like an adult on TikTok while I'm getting ready to go to work. And I saw a hysterical video and I laughed really loud and woke you up upstairs.
Yeah, I fell asleep. I was so tired. I fell asleep. And next thing I know, there's just, I'm like, okay.
Yes. All right, let's jump to some housekeeping really quick. Make sure you follow the Poisoner's Almanac podcast on whatever platform that you're listening on. We appreciate that in advance. Follow us on socials. We will have links in the show notes. Specifically follow the podcast Instagram, Poisoners_Almanac. Becca runs that account herself.
That's me.
And she updates it with an even deeper level of detail. She gets real granular on that there podcast. That's right. It's super interesting. Also, thanks in advance for leaving 5-star reviews on whatever platform you're listening on. That functions like a tip jar, and it pushes the podcast further into the algorithm of all of these platforms and gets it into the ears of listeners just like you. Big news. Patreon is up and running. It is up and running. There'll be a link in the show notes if you guys want to support us on Patreon. Also, we need to, you guys are giving us suggestions on the Patreon page about perks for members. We have the one, single tier at the moment where every paid member gets a shout out by name here on the podcast. But obviously, as the podcast grows, as the audience grows, we want to offer, more cool stuff, merch, maybe live streams. I don't know. What else is out there?
Well, I'm working on some prototypes for merch, just getting some ideas in order and working, talking to some people about what to do, how to do all that on a larger scale. So
yes,
I'm getting that ready. But I think that I'd like to just sort of make available to anyone who wants it, and then maybe do other stuff for Patreon, whether it be like a Facebook or Discord.
Yeah, like a private online group.
Yeah, that'd be cool for everybody to talk together.
You could do that.
Or live stuff, or I don't know, something. Figure it out.
Yes.
I'd like to do extra content, if, I can find the time to actually do more research.
That's right.
Because when I research, I spend hours. I just get sucked into it.
She's, we've mentioned before, my wife is ADHD, and this is one of her special interest is poisons and true crime. And she has to pull the reins on herself to not, end up with 100 pages of notes for every single episode.
Today's episode actually took me about 8 to 10 hours out of my week to really do this. So, which I enjoy it. It's just time goes by so quick, and I realize,
yes.
So,
on that note, if you support us on Patreon, it allows Becca and myself to focus even more on the podcast and to create better content and more content. So if you're enjoying it, consider jumping on the Patreon. And speaking of the Patreon supporters, we need to shout you guys out by name. We have, of course, the app refreshed so that I can't read it. Here we go. Shout out to Mara Santiago, Carl, Kate the Fairy, Grace Lahane, Genevieve, Nave Shetreat, John Wendt, Inken Hafner, and Kara Yorsek. Thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. Also, want to shout out our listener supporters on Spotify. Delshawn Harris, Taylor McCaleb, Carl Ziegler Jr., and Drew Rivas. Thank you guys so much for supporting the podcast. We appreciate it.
You guys rock.
You do rock.
But all
no,
of
you rock, man.
Bruh.
So, yeah, thanks for that support. And also feel free to send us questions or content suggestions to the podcast Instagram or on the Patreon page. We're always or Spotify. You can comment on the podcast on Spotify as well. We're always reviewing comments, and we try to reply to everyone and review comments in a timely manner. Yeah,
we did get a comment concerning. A few people have mentioned insulin and its use as a poison.
Yes.
And we'll have to cover that one soon. The reason I didn't cover it in the other one with medicines was like insulin's a funny one because it is a necessary drug for so many people, but it has been misused and used criminally. So, but we'll have to go over that one sometime soon.
One of my own patients recently stated, an insulin-dependent diabetic, they told me with a straight face, I borrowed some insulin from my neighbor.
Oh my. Okay.
So anyway, that's what I do at work.
And maybe we should cover it too for educational purposes.
That would be a great idea. Medical ignorance abounds. So
yeah, and it can be dangerous. So
correct.
Very much so.
So what are we covering today?
We are talking about alcohol.
Not alcohol.
Alcohol.
Okay.
More specifically, we're going to talk about the history of alcohol. We're going to talk about ethanol, ethyl alcohol, methyl alcohol, which is like wood alcohol, and how things went crazy in the 20s because of Prohibition. Here in the States, at least.
Oh boy.
So, and I'm going to talk about the history of alcohol as it concerns other places too in the beginning here, because alcohol's been around for a long time. ETOH, if you're in healthcare, for some reason,
correct,
it just gets written as ETOH, even though it's actually C2H5OH. But
well, there you go.
ETOH just sounds fun.
Where does the ETOH come from? If that's not the,
I'm guessing the ET is not the alien, but like it's just
ethyl.
Ethyl, yeah. And so they just shorten it to ethyl and then the OH.
Okay. Something tells me they needed to come up with a term to describe it that non-medical personnel would not easily recognize. So they wouldn't, if they ever saw their own chart, they wouldn't readily know, we know you're a drunk.
I believe it's alcohol dependence or substance abuse disorder. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
But back in the day, it's always been somewhat taboo, alcoholism and such. But it is it's an illness, and it's pretty rough. I've had my share of patients who went through DTs, and we'll talk about some of that too.
I've seen it too.
It can be pretty darn rough, and it can, if you've been drinking for a long time, you really need help to get off of it. Like you need medical supervision and help to get off of it, because it messes with your central nervous system and everything else. So
I admitted a patient in the last several months who was an alcoholic. He had a half bottle of brandy sitting right next to his recliner. The next visit was made by somebody else. He answered the door completely naked.
There you go. I mean, and I'm not going to tell stories here, but I have some stories I'm telling you. So
sure. Okay. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So we need to discuss the differences of alcohols, basically ethanol and methanol, or ethyl alcohol, methyl alcohol, and how they have affected cultures and peoples, and how crazy America went during a certain time in history. I feel like you could say that about so many different times. Like, well, America was crazy then, weren't they? Yeah. And it's like, we think of Prohibition as its own thing, and it was, but it played a big part with the Depression and other issues at hand as well. So, yes, while drinking alcohol, or ethyl alcohol, ethanol, has its bad effects and has honestly ruined lives through addiction, misuse, etc., the prohibiting of ethyl alcohol, ethanol, whatever you want to call it, altogether did its own damage. Now, that damage can actually be, well, it can definitely be blamed on the American government because they purposefully poisoned people who attempted to drink anyway.
This is true.
Yep. So let's get into it. So ethanol, or the alcohol that's found in intoxicating beverages, is a poison. There, I said it.
There.
Okay. It isn't arsenic or lead, of course, or mercury, but it does have toxic effects and can cause all sorts of problems, including death when misused or overused.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I know we mentioned like DTs, which is delirium tremens. And
oh, I thought it stood for detox.
No.
Oh.
Delirium tremens, no. But I mean,
don't mind me. I just also work in healthcare.
Well, you're a PT.
It's fun.
You're a PT now.
I'm already. Oh man.
Well, like the reason you have withdrawals in the first place, like it messes with, like, alcohol depresses or slows down your central nervous system, right? So if you consistently consume significant amounts of alcohol, and significant amounts can mean like even 1 or 2 drinks a day, if you're used to doing that all like for years, even your central nervous system gets used to this effect. So your central nervous system has to work harder to overcome depressant effects of alcohol to keep your body functioning. So that's what's going on when you drink consistently like that. And when you stop consuming the alcohol after this prolonged or heavy use, your central nervous system cannot respond or regulate fast enough. So it's used to doing something, and now you've taken that away. So it becomes overexcited because there's no more alcohol to slow it down. That makes sense?
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
And this overload of activity results in those withdrawal effects.
Oh, okay.
So that's how that kind of works.
Yeah.
And you can have like some people just have mild withdrawals. So, I mean, anywhere between like weakness, nausea, vomiting, mild stuff. Some people end up with seizures. It can be pretty bad. But delirium tremens can also include things like hallucinations, confusion, shaking, irregular heart rate, sweating, and even death for some.
Wow.
Yeah. I have seen people go into DTs and not come out the same, just stayed confused. They just didn't come out of it.
That's intense.
So it's pretty intense. And they usually treat it with, like, if they're helping you in a hospital, they used to give you like what they called beer IVs, not like straight in, but they would like give it to you, like they would hang a beer basically, and you're drinking it like slowly to sort of offset your central nervous system going crazy.
Yeah.
Now
that's wild.
Now they do sedatives, barbiturates, things like that. Benzodiazepines.
It's cheaper to do a Bud Light though.
So yeah, but we are actually going to talk about too the differences between fermentation and distillation, because you're going to hear those terms a few times.
Please.
In this. So
please unpack those. Please.
Fermentation has been around for a long time. It's basically you're using yeast to convert sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Fermentation can happen on its own. Like, apples just sitting around. They can be fermented. We've all seen like the videos of like the bear that ate the fermented apples, and he's like literally drunk walking around. Fun times.
For those of you who know how to party.
Gonna bet that down. Sorry. Okay. Now, distillation is a process that actually where you separate liquids from solids, or liquids from different boiling points. So you're basically adding heat to this process, and it condenses, and then condensing the resulting vapors. So you put heat, vapors, condense it, and you've got basically alcohol as a byproduct.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I hope that all made sense.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So I was actually kind of scared of being overwhelmed when it came to researching the history of alcohol, because of how long it's been around and how important a part of human history it has been. It's believed that alcoholic beverages, basically purposely fermented for drinking, have been around since Neolithic days. So like that was around 10,000 BC. So, yeah, and this is as evidenced by like Stone Age jugs and other artifacts. The earliest evidence that we have of a brewery was found in a site in, is it Haifa? Is now Israel. It is thought that alcoholic beverages made about 13,000 years ago, made with wheat or barley, were important for religious reasons. The earliest wines were discovered to have been made in the country of Georgia, not the state, the country, in 6000 BC. Yes, it's a country.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
I'm just shocked. Did you know that before this?
Yes, I did. I know I'm terrible at geography, but I knew Georgia was a country.
Oh, boy.
Who's being condescending now?
Me.
Mm-hmm.
I am.
So, but yeah, that was around 6000 BC. And in China, around 7000 to 6650 BC.
So booze has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It's been a part of human culture and just society for a very long time.
Wow.
In this time in China, there was a chemical analysis done in 2004 showing residue of fermented beverages made of grapes, hawthorn berries, honey, and rice. So that's pretty cool. This is around the same time that beers and wines started to be made in the Middle East as well. True or more modern distillation of alcoholic beverages, so using those fermented products to produce a higher content of alcohol, basically. Those was first done in China in the 12th century and then spread to the Middle East, then Italy and Germany, where it was basically considered alchemy at one point. So that's fun.
Okay.
So if you're like brewing your own beer, you can just tell people, yeah, I'm into alchemy.
Nice.
Cool.
I mean, that's a great reason to get into it.
You could call your beer the Philosopher's Stone.
Heyo.
The Sorcerer's Stone, wherever you're from. If you do, send me some, please.
Yes.
Ciders were being...
Yes, is. Just kidding.
Ciders were being made in Britain and northern Spain in around 55 BC using apples. Like apples.
Like a hard cider.
Celtic peoples were drinking alcoholic ciders around 3000 BC. Egypt was also into drinking wine and beer. It was usually like their socially and religiously at that time. There were multiple gods associated with drinking, and daily drinking among laborers was a thing. The largest industrial scale brewery or beer factory, named Abydos Beer Factory, was found in Egypt dating back to 5,000 years ago. So this is an actual factory. We talked about the brewery in what is now Israel, but this is like the larger scale kind of situation. So we also know that the Greeks and Romans were drinking wines. These were usually diluted with water, as unmixed wine was considered uncivilized and barbarian.
Alchemy.
Now, the Greeks believed the gift of wine came from the god Dionysus, and it was often presented as an offering back to the gods and used socially and culturally. And they had like they even had their own drinking games, their own drinking songs, things like that. Socrates once said, "Wine moistens and tempers the spirit and lulls the cares of the mind to rest. It revives our joys and is oil to the dying flame of life."
I need that on a t-shirt.
Well, he also said some crappy things about women.
Socrates.
Here we go. Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with Socrates.
I mean,
he's great until you get him on the subject of women.
So
at that point, I'm like, sit down. But
the Greeks also had a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, they did, and they
hated him a little more than they loved him.
Yeah, in fact, they made him drink poison. So
they hated him to death.
Alcohol also helped with agriculture and trade. They also had stories to teach how too much wine could lead to trouble, such as the story of Odysseus and Polyphemus, like in the Odyssey. Polyphemus was the Cyclops, the one-eyed dude, big giant dude.
I forgot he had a name.
Polyphemus, yeah.
Okay.
So Odysseus got Polyphemus drunk off of what they called neat wine, which is basically undiluted wine. Like, I take my whiskey neat.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that word means the same.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So, yeah, so he got him drunk, passed out drunk. And because Polyphemus, as you know, was literally like eating his men. He was just like picking up and eating them.
Yes.
They were trapped, and there you go. So he got him drunk. The Cyclops passed out, and Odysseus blinded him by stabbing him in the eye. Fun times. So drunkenness can take out the biggest of creatures, I guess. It's like they're one of the mottos of that story.
Gotcha.
If you need some Greek tea, Alexander the Great's mom was in a Dionysian cult and was constantly inebriated, from what I've read. So he was Macedonian.
Can't you just drink at home? Like, do you have to go through all the...
Well, yeah. In Macedonia, getting drunk was apparently manly for some reason too. Like,
okay,
yeah. So, but like if you're in a cult with a god who gave people wine, I mean, drinking is going to be a part of the religious ceremonies, I'm sure.
Makes sense.
So, the Romans basically did as the Greeks did, but on a higher scale. They had the wine god Bacchus, which is the Roman version of Dionysus.
Yeah.
The followers of which would later be suppressed because of their quote unquote morals, because I mean the Romans weren't doing anything else immoral. Okay. Now, drinking wine was a social, religious, and cultural thing for them. Beer was seen as un-Roman and barbaric. That just seems condescending, right? We only drink wine.
That's so stupid.
Now, those among the elite would drink, then purge themselves so they could drink more. So think Hunger Games, like the Capitol parties, where they this is so you can put more, drink more, and eat more.
I was listening to Bert Kreischer's podcast, a stand-up comedian. He had a country singer named Hardy on as a guest. Hardy's wife is like, Bert puts on this drinking game Olympics like every year, and he invites a bunch of his celebrity friends to participate. Hardy's wife, she drilled liquor in the first event, immediately hurled, and then walked right back up. I was like, all right, what's next?
How old is she?
They're in their 30s, I know.
Okay, well, she'll be able to do that for much longer, because the older you get, the harder that stuff is.
And it was so funny because Hardy was like, she thought she she was a little embarrassed, like she kind of went too hard. And Bert was like, no, man, she's amazing.
Oh my gosh.
Bert Kreischer is basically a functional alcoholic. It's the running joke on the internet. Like, it's so hysterical to hear him talk about his drinking.
I drink a lot in my 20s, but now and I'm thankful that I got over that, honestly. Now I only drink on special occasions, or if I've had a really hard week. And it's one drink, but even that one drink, I have a headache the hour after I drink it. So it's over already for me. So I have to drink a lot of water if I'm going to have a drink these days. And I'm almost 40, so. Now, the best wines were obviously for the higher ups and the wealthy, though slaves and soldiers also drank. It was just usually much lower quality stuff. It was also big with those in politics and in political dealings. Later on, drunkenness would become a moral issue, as written about by many famous poets and philosophers.
Falafels.
It's falafel. Philosophers like Seneca and Pliny. I always call him Pliny. I could be saying his name wrong.
Pliny.
Like Pliny the Elder.
Pliny.
There's been plenty of times that I've probably said his name. I'm just kidding.
I want to say it just like Leonardo said Splinter in the Ninja Turtles movie. Pliny. Water is the essence of moisture.
Oh my gosh. So medicinally, its uses have been mentioned in Sumerian and Egyptian texts as far back as 2100 BC. The Hebrew Bible also mentions some medicinal uses of wine. Greek doctors such as Galen used wine to treat wounds, things like that, to prevent infection. Alcohol, though, of lesser strength than, say, today's beverages, remained a normal part of everyday life in Europe during the Middle Ages, and even nuns were allowed up to 6 pints of ale a day in some places. Now remember, this is a lower alcohol content.
It comes in pints?
I'm getting one. Yeah, this is a different, at this time, this ale would have had a lower alcohol concentration. So
okay, so that pint is not the same as a pint of
today's ale
today. That's hysterical.
If I were a nun, I'd probably need it too.
Right? Bored to tears, man.
Or just annoyed with the priests, the dudes. What are these guys talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I were a woman in the Middle Ages, I'd probably drink every day too, because being a woman back then was probably sucked.
100%.
So cider and wines were used or consumed in the higher classes. Indigenous Americans were making wine-like beverages and consuming them for religious purposes long before the Europeans showed up in the 15th century or so. South Americans were making beer from cassava and maize. In early Catholicism and Christianity, including the Puritans, mind you, the ones that were like literally burning women as witches. There was at least one guy that was killed too, who's crushed to death.
The Puritans were what?
They were into drinking.
Oh, they consumed alcohol.
Alcohol was considered to be a gift from God to be used in moderation at that time, yes. But drunkenness was still considered sinful.
Okay, you're talking about American Puritans.
Yes.
Wow. I cannot believe that they would.
Although I read somewhere they thought like chocolate was a sin.
Oh.
I'm not sure if that was during that time or not. I have to look that up, but yeah.
I mean, that's shocking. Just considering how fundamentalist and exclusionary the Puritans were, I'm shocked to hear that. Maybe, and that's because, again, I've said this before. I grew up in fundamentalist, Christianity. Like, I think though, the teetotal, complete alcohol abstinence, that's like a 20th century.
There's certain. I know, like John Wesley was super against drinking, so I'm sure he preached many messages. And
yeah, I'm just shocked to hear the Puritans drank it all. I'm fascinated with that. They killed many women because they thought they were witches, but would drink.
Okay. So Increase Mather, fun times, fun name, once said.
Did you say Increase?
Increase Mather, that's his name.
Who named that child?
A Puritan. Okay, a Puritan.
Increase
Mather.
Like increase the temperature.
He's actually rather he's rather famous as a Puritan of his day.
Oh, please continue.
So he once said, "Drink in itself is a good creature of God and to be received with thankfulness. But the abuse of drink is from Satan." Satan, actually. The wine is from God. The drunkard is from the devil. Not the devil. But yeah, that's so apparently there's like a fine line, I guess. So yeah, but if you know anything about us Americans over here, self-control is it's very difficult for us.
Yeah.
As we'll see in just a moment, because drinking did get out of hand.
Oh, please do continue.
Now, by 1767, most New England families were drinking like 7 barrels of hard cider annually. So that's like 35 gallons per person annually. You got to remember too, like we didn't have as good a system of like purifying water too.
That's right. It probably served a antibacterial purpose. People
were like getting cholera and all kinds of stuff because not all water was good. So,
which is what makes the situation in Flint, Michigan that much more absurd.
Yeah, there's a lot going. Yeah. So, and cholera is not the only thing you can catch from bad water. I'm just using that as an example. There's a lot of nasty stuff. So, yeah. Now, distilled spirits, liquors, and whiskeys, etc., those became big, and honestly, like drunkenness really became a problem because now the alcohol content has gone up in a lot of these beverages. Okay, so Britain had a gin epidemic at one point in the 1700s. Like, it was pretty bad, and drunkenness especially became a problem for the advancement of industry as it led to workers not being efficient or safe. So they were drinking like, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
For sure.
Just showing up to work and losing a finger or two, probably not even noticing.
Oh, boy.
So in the early 19th century, cheap whiskey made of corn was prevalent in America because we had a lot of corn. And Americans were drinking a lot. As I said earlier, cholera was a big risk to unclean water, as well as other issues. So alcohol was obviously more prevalent in the diet. And I can't not talk about the American Revolution and the Founding Fathers' drinking habits because...
Hey.
Yeah. Drinking was such a part of early American culture that alcohol, such as beers, whiskey, rum, etc., they were served with like every meal. For most people, and taverns were like the first post offices because people frequented them that often, so they just got their mail there too.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Did you know that you could send a child by mail back in the day? If you
No, I didn't know that.
like if you wanted them to like visit like, I don't know, your aunt's farm or something, you wanted to send them over there, like a mailman could take them.
Just on a wagon.
Like a baby, they could just stick them. Yeah.
I'm shocked. So you said they used them as post offices, like you could literally just go in there.
Yeah.
And you could get mail. Do I have any mail? And they'd be like, yes, you do.
Yeah. Which it just makes, I mean, like if you think about like certain like fantasy stories or like when you play D&D and go to the tavern and someone delivers you a message. I don't know, like that seems familiar. So maybe that comes from that.
Mm-hmm.
So public drunkenness was still considered immoral to those who, those that were drunk often were called out and humiliated for it. So, I mean, public drunkenness was still a taboo sort of thing, but people were drinking a lot. And I imagine people could drink a lot because their tolerance grew. So it's not like it's not like they weren't drinking a lot and then making fun of people who were drunk, because they were drinking a lot. They were probably just more tolerant to it. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, though, many visitors to the colonies were actually impressed at how much Americans could drink without getting drunk. So, yeah.
Because the tolerance was high. That's fascinating.
During a party on September 15th, 1787, a few days before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers ran up a large tab for alcohol, including 54 bottles of Madeira. It's like a wine.
Yes.
60 bottles of claret, 8 bottles of whiskey, 22 bottles of porter, 8 bottles of hard cider, 12 bottles of beer, and 7 bowls of alcoholic punch. This is all for 55 attendees.
Mercy.
And this would have cost over about $15,000 in today's money. This they partied hard.
15 grand in today's money.
Yeah.
15 grand on booze.
Yep. And this was supposed to be like a party for George Washington, I think. So and George Washington, he spent over like 7% of his income while he was in office on alcohol. So,
that's crazy.
I'm just spitting facts about the Founding Fathers here because it really ticks me off when people are like they idolize the Founding Fathers as these like angelic characters. I'm like, first of all, no, people, I'm not downing them. I'm not saying like
no.
They were awful
I got
people,
respect for the things they did do.
Yeah, but like at the same time, like they were doing stuff, like they weren't angels.
They want to believe a certain way about the United States.
They had slaves.
Oh, 100%.
Most of them did.
They want to believe a certain way about the United States, and so the Founding Fathers have to be. It's an unofficial sainthood. Mm-hmm. The truth is, they had just as much vice as any other part of society.
Oh yeah. Anyway.
And history records this.
Yeah, I heard Benjamin Franklin was super into some kinky stuff. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we won't go into that, but George Washington himself actually ran a very profitable distillery beginning in 1797, which also became one of the biggest in the country in his time. It was destroyed in a fire in 1814, but has since been restored. You can actually visit it today.
Is that Mount Vernon?
Yeah.
Was that his place?
Mm-hmm. You could actually.
Jefferson's place was Monticello, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mount Vernon was Washington. I think I've been to Mount Vernon. It was a family vacation years ago.
Did you have a drink?
I did not. I was in middle school. But yeah, it looks. There's no ruins of anything over there. I think you're right. We probably did see that structure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You
could actually have a drink there like every so often. I think they make a certain amount during the year or something. Anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, Thomas Jefferson was quite big on wine. He drank while drafting the Constitution, and he ended up having to pay a solid tab for his wine consumption after leaving office. It would have been about $200,000 in today's money.
Jesus Christ.
He had a winery and brewery at his estate, and graciously had a dumbwaiter put in to spare his servants' knees coming up from his extensive wine cellar. It says servants, but I'm guessing it's probably slaves too.
Probably.
Because like when I read it, it said servants, and I'm like, who are we talking about? Yeah, it was slaves too. Let's call things as they are, please. Benjamin Franklin was a fan of Madeira wine, as was John Quincy Adams. Old Benji actually came up with fun ways to say someone was drunk. Like he would come up with all kinds of things. And you can actually look them up. I didn't write a bunch of them down here because I was busy doing other stuff. So. But it's pretty funny. I think hit on the old jawbone. Hit with Samson's jawbone. Yeah. Something weird like that's a biblical reference, but he was a funny guy. Like he did some stuff, but he was funny. He was a little crazy, but he was funny.
Hit with Samson's old jawbone.
So yeah, he had a lot of them. You can actually look him up. John Hancock was a notorious beer drinker. Oh, is that why he wrote his name so big? You think?
Possibly. He probably could not.
See,
his depth perception was gone.
They say it's because he really wanted like King James, or is it King George?
King George.
King George to see it. And I'm like, I'm sure he saw it. But
sure.
What if he was just like drunk and he just couldn't see?
Do you remember that guy, Jake Shane, super viral on TikTok for his impressions of like the founding fathers? Like signing the Declaration of Independence after John Hancock. And he's like, oh my God, it's so huge. Why would you do it?
Can't see. Yeah. Maybe he couldn't see. We don't know. Paul Revere was drinking rum the night of his ride. And he actually, when he was like saying the British are coming, he was actually calling out to people in taverns because most people frequented taverns. That's where most people were.
Is that true?
Mm-hmm. So he would go, he would mostly ride to taverns and be like, the British are coming.
Because he knew it would become public knowledge. That was the quickest way. That's great.
Don't the British like call them public houses?
Yeah, that's what pub means. Pub is short for public house.
I only know that because I used to watch all the old Sherlock Holmes videos.
Well, as one does.
Did you ask the public house?
The public house.
Anyway. So, yeah. Patrick Henry owned his own tavern. So I think you get my drift.
Give me booze or give me death.
So I think you get my drift on the whole founding fathers situation.
Booze is a part of it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Big part of it. And
this needs booze.
Don't get me wrong. I'm sure it was tumultuous times, and everybody probably needed a drink at that point. And like I said, the water was bad, but they drank a lot, a lot. So that's just some of the history surrounding, ethanol, and the religious stuff plays a big role later when Prohibition is being pushed into history. So
certainly
that's kind of why I mentioned all that. So we're going to talk first, though, on the effects that alcohol has on the body, and then we'll jump into why some wanted alcohol gone. And we're talking specifically about ethanol when I'm talking about this alcohol. I will tell you when we're talking about methyl or wood alcohol when we get to that point.
Okay.
Because it is a little bit different. Now, in Deborah Blum's The Poisoner's Handbook, which we have discussed a little bit already, she quotes Alexander Gettler, one of my heroes, New York's forensic chemist / chief toxicologist, basically, during the early and mid 1900s. And he said, no other poison causes so many deaths or leads to or intensifies so many diseases, both physical and mental, as does this alcohol and the many forms in which it is taken. And they were like, people were just being brought in to the morgue, off the streets all the time. Like,
right.
Having basically drunk themselves to death.
Wow.
It was really sad. So the brain, we're talking about the brain. Alcohol actually crosses the blood-brain barrier. And Gettler's colleague / employer, medical examiner Charles Norris, often found the brains of those who died of acute alcohol poisoning to seem bruised and flushed with blood. He also found that alcohol, being an irritant, caused moderate to severe inflammation in the stomach and esophagus. Nausea, vomiting, dehydration were all common as well, just as they are still today for heavy drinkers. They noticed also the long-term effects on the livers of chronic drinkers as well as other organs. We know now that alcohol interferes with communication pathways in the brain, causing mood and behavior changes, as well as the inability to think clearly and problems with coordination. You've probably seen videos of people doing those DUI tests. Walk in a straight line. I can't walk in a straight line sober, so I would fail anyway. Like I tend to veer to the left every time I walk. And even when I was we had to take wellness class in college, and my best friend Laura, when we were there, I would constantly walk into her. We were supposed to walk around a track, and I kept walking into her. I could not walk straight. But yeah. So fun times. I hope I never get tested because I could be sober and still fail.
True.
Now, drinking heavily over an extended period of time or too much at once can also cause Heart problems, including cardiomyopathy, which is like a stretching, just damage to the heart muscle. Arrhythmias, like dangerous heart rhythms. Stroke and high blood pressure. The liver metabolizes alcohol, and so is also affected by drinking. Common liver problems from drinking include steatosis or fatty liver, alcoholic hepatitis, fibrosis, which is like scarring, and cirrhosis. And heavy or chronic drinking can also lead to pancreatitis and various cancers, including oral, pharynx or larynx cancers, esophageal cancer. Before you ask, yes, there's 2 tubes in your throat. You don't just have one. Okay. You have your esophagus and you have your like pharynx, larynx area right there. Breast cancer. Fun fact, not really fun. Just one drink a day can actually lead to a 5 to 15% increase in breast cancer in women.
Wow.
Also colorectal cancers. So even only having one drink a day can lead to a moderate increase in the risk for cancer. So about 3.5% of cancer deaths in America around 2009 were alcohol related. That's about 19,500 deaths.
Yeah.
So also, alcohol consumption can weaken the immune system. Chronic drinkers are more likely to catch pneumonia, tuberculosis, etc. Yes, tuberculosis is still around, people.
Yes.
It is. Alcohol basically slows the body's response to intruders or infections, basically. So, okay, that's enough depressing news about that. And I'm not like attacking anybody who drinks. Look, I have a drink on occasion, so it's just the facts that it is a poison, and if you drink it too much, it's gonna affect your health. So speaking of depression, though, we are approaching the Great Depression around this time. It kind of came into effect after Prohibition was already a thing. Coincidence? I think not. Okay, actually, I'm not sure if it was or not. I think it did affect, both of them affected the other. So one of the biggest reasons Prohibition actually ended in 1933 was because the government needed that money from the tax revenue of alcohol sales back. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Nice.
So I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's go from how it started. We kind of have to go back to the early 19th century before the Civil War. So in 1805, Reverend Ebenezer Porter, which I think is hilarious because all I think about is Scrooge.
Oh,
right?
Of course.
He delivered the first anti-alcohol sermon in the U.S. titled "The Fatal Effects of Ardent Spirits."
Ardent spirits.
Witchcraft. In 1826, revivalist Lyman Beecher published 6 sermons on the evils of alcohol, calling intemperance or drinking moral ruin.
I thought I might read to you all for an hour or 2. I brought along 4 dicey sermons.
And all matters moral. Now, the Washingtonian Movement formed in 1840 in Maryland. I was like, why not Washington? Why is it in Maryland? Anyway.
Is it a reference to Washington, D.C.?
Maybe.
Okay.
It's the Washingtonian Movement. This was one of the first anti-alcohol movements in America. It basically started as alcoholics sort of helping each other get and stay sober, which sounds nice. But then it started delving into like politics, and then the more members it got, the more controversial the issues became. There was a lot of infighting at this point. And after only a few years, the organization dissolved. So it started off with great purposes. Like,
that's fascinating.
We're trying to help each other, get off this sort of addiction we've got going on.
Yeah, it was an addiction support group.
Yeah, but
that's
then
fascinating.
It just went in too deep into politics, religion, and all that other stuff.
That's wild.
And just disintegrated because of all the infighting.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, a number of Christian temperance movements were also mad at them, the Washingtonians, because they were putting themselves above God or something.
That sounds like something a Christian temperance would
because
say.
They were like, yeah, we can get off this by ourselves. So we can help each other get off this. And it wasn't involving a lot, religion as much as they would have liked. So they were mad at them. Anyway, Maine actually outlawed the manufacturing and sale of liquor in 1851 after this dude, Neil Dow, got a lot of signatures on his petition in favor of the law. Like, they were the first to ever do that. Other states followed suit, calling it the Maine law. But none of this stuck, as by 1860, these laws, including in Maine, were done away with. So it didn't last.
The laws made it illegal to sell alcohol?
Yeah, and to manufacture it.
And to make it.
To liquor, at least.
Oh, okay.
Liquor. I don't know about beer.
Okay.
It might have done the same with it too, but... So thanks to preachers / revivalists, etc., preaching that alcohol was a sin, even though drinking in moderation was fine for Christians for the longest time, like in the Puritan days and such.
Interesting.
More and more religious people became huge supporters of not just ending drinking among themselves, but ending it for everyone.
Yeah.
One of these, Eliza Thompson in 1873, or 1874, kind of in that area, was adamant about leading groups of women in Hillsboro, Ohio to pray in or in front of taverns and other places selling alcohol. They also had like temperance carols or hymns that they would sing. Deck the halls with vows of not alcohol. I don't know. This was actually somewhat effective because in less than 2 weeks, she and the other ladies had convinced like 9 saloon owners out of like 13 to close. But it didn't last because many of the owners went back to selling their alcohol. I mean, what else are they going to do? That's what they've been doing for the longest time. So that's how they make their money. They had gotten their inspiration to do this by a guy named Diocletian Lewis.
Okay, he's already pretentious. I'm
Dio
sorry.
for short, which is hilarious to me because I'm thinking like black.
Right, James Dio.
So
Love it.
But he had this honorary like MD from a college of homeopathy.
Oh.
And he called himself a full-fledged doctor, though.
Oh dear.
Like it's one thing like to do that and be like, yeah, this is telling the truth about like, you know, where you got it from, but then like also calling yourself, I'm a doctor.
Nope.
I'm a doctor. So that bothers me, but whatever. He also invented the beanbag.
Okay.
So that's fun. Now, anytime you sit in a beanbag, you can think of this guy.
Of all the things, I could never have predicted you were about to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You're welcome for that. Anyway, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, so WCTU, was founded in 1874 in Cleveland, Ohio. They became a really big organization.
Home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Francis Willard led the group in 1879, bringing in other issues besides temperance, such as labor laws, prison reform, and suffrage. So that became a big deal.
Oh, that was folded in with their platform. Oh.
After her death in 1898, however, the organization distanced itself from feminist groups. Susan B. Anthony had actually been involved with the WCTU before going on to lead the suffrage movement itself.
Okay.
But the WCTU focused more heavily on just temperance at this point.
Right. Anthony she was leading the charge for women's suffrage.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this makes sense because women wanting the right to vote for prohibition, they also wanted the right to own property, divorce abusive husbands. Like this was the start of like, yeah, I want to be able to vote for that. Also, you know.
Yeah. While we're here.
Yeah. So like that, you know, it helped that become a thing at least.
Also, it's worse than you think.
Yeah. So. And of course, it would only come as a result of change of laws. So they were trying to work together to do all that. Now, those who opposed drinking did have good intentions for the most part, considering the fact that many of these abusive men that they wanted to leave were drinking heavily and becoming violent through the use of alcohol. So it was, you know, we talked about how alcohol can change a person's behavior, all that kind of thing. So you got like a lot of domestic violence going on.
Yeah.
Because of drinking alcohol. And they might also just be asshats. I mean,
well, I was going to say,
and alcohol can increase the asshattery. So, I mean, the thing is, and I'm,
there's a market increase in asshatteration.
Yeah, I just want to make clear that drinking is no excuse for being an asshat.
Correct.
Okay, it's not.
And, you know, I was just going to mention, like, the bar for this, you know, generation of men, like the men that these women would have to choose from or be chosen by, more accurately, like, it's not the pickings are
right. Women didn't have rights.
Slim. Yeah, it's
at this point either end.
Yeah.
So, and it's not like they could vote to have more rights because they couldn't even vote.
Couldn't even vote.
So,
all they had at their disposal was advocacy at that point.
And so these men who were drinking heavily. They were violent. They were like losing their jobs and unable to. And the women couldn't really work.
No.
Some who did some could get jobs, but at the same time, like if you've got a woman who's raising like 8 kids, when is she going to be able to do that? And he can't stay home with them because he's drunk. So like you got a lot of these issues going on. So and the women are basically like, it's the alcohol, and it's like it could be the alcohol, but it also could be because your husband's
an
a
idiot
jackass
to begin with. If he had never drank alcohol, your life still sucks.
Yeah, possibly. So could it be the alcohol? Could be.
It doesn't help.
But it also, but you can't use that as an excuse to be like, well, I hit her, but I was drinking.
And this is
the alcohol's fault.
Right.
So.
This is during the time where you could beat a woman.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter.
Yeah.
If you did it in your own house, you could kill your wife. You could physically beat her to the point of dying. And that was okay.
Yeah. I mean,
nobody would really hang it on you.
You might get like a year.
If you got charged.
If you got that, yeah. Mm-hmm. If they even noticed.
You could roll her down the stairs after she dies and be like, oh no, what a terrible accident. She fell. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it was a lot.
The medical examiner is also an oaf like you are.
Yeah,
he's not going to say the cause of death is domestic abuse.
Well, also like coroners, like back in the day.
Oh yes,
you could pay a coroner to say whatever.
Of course, the patriarchy was bulletproof.
Craziness.
But it wasn't poison proof.
No, it was not poison proof.
We've covered that.
Oh. So yeah, people were, like I said, were drinking a lot, and it was becoming a problem. So it was any violence that was there already, it was escalating because of how much they were drinking.
Correct.
And crime and everything. So the solution just made the problem worse, though. And we're going to talk about that.
Prohibition.
Yeah. So the AntiSaloon League, for some reason I have trouble saying that in one fell swoop. The AntiSaloon League was formed in 1893 by Reverend Howard Hyde Russell in Oberlin, Ohio. Within 2 years, it was a national organization, getting most of its support from Protestant evangelical churches, and was going after all levels of government to get the manufacture and sale of alcohol prohibited. The ASL, as I'll call it, became very powerful in politics, and several members became members of Congress by 1916, making the 18th Amendment, which was the prohibition of alcohol, much easier to get passed in 1919.
Fascinating. When did the ASL start?
1893, excuse me.
1893. So that by what year? The
18th Amendment was passed in 1919.
So in 20 years' time, they literally were able to place congressional. Wow.
Yeah. And by this time, they were using terms such as wet and dry concerning the opposite viewpoints of drinking. So like, and one of the wet proponents, meaning that they were pro,
sure,
anti-prohibition. So pro drinking if you want to.
There was a song that came out. This is maybe late 90s, early 2000s from the country group Rascal Flatts. It was called Dry County Girl.
Oh, interesting. But one of these wet proponents was Adolphus Busch. You'll recognize a lot of these names.
Beer?
You'll recognize a lot of these names. He had gone into the brewery supply business in 1857 and later joined his father-in-law, Eberhard Anheuser, to become the first brewer to succeed at bottling for shipment. So there's a lot of history in here. It's pretty interesting.
Wow.
In 1910, he had the largest brewery in the Western Hemisphere. He also was not a fan of distillers, believing that brewers like him, who were, I guess, working with fermentation, were creating superior products. So kind of a beer versus whiskey situation, I suppose.
Okay.
So there was a lot of that, even though it was like, okay. Maybe it was more
probably
of
just a tactic to protect his business.
Yeah. So now
and all the alcoholics are like, I don't care what it is, just give me booze.
Yeah, well, and it goes all the way back to like the Greek and Roman times we were talking about, like, oh, well, it's barbaric if you drink beer, but wine is superior. Like, there's always some weird thing like that. Okay, the 18th Amendment prohibiting the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol nationwide was passed in January of 1919 and would go into effect the next year. So, like, they had like a year to get ready for that. This was followed up with the Volstead Act in October of 1919, despite Woodrow Wilson, who was president at the time. He was trying to like veto that. This basically made the laws and punishments specific concerning prohibition. It made it enforceable, I suppose. Well, enforceable. We're going to talk about how enforceable it was.
Wilson was dry?
He was trying to oppose the
prohibition.
Yeah.
He didn't think it would change anything.
No, or he just was like, this is...
Just politically opposed.
During the time between the passing of the amendment and its enforcement, some people got creative Some began making their own stills and using not so great ingredients to make alcohol.
Mhm.
If legal alcohol would be taken away, these would resort to something else. Wood alcohol, because called this because it was basically made by heating slabs of wood or wood chips or anything made of wood to about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, would be like 204 degrees Celsius, then distilling the vaporized natural liquids that came off. This resulted in methyl alcohol, acetic acid, and acetone, the stuff you take off your fingernail polish with.
Yeah.
So distilled further, one could attain pure methyl alcohol. So it was clear and odorless and cheap. It was also deadly. Methyl alcohol was known as industrial alcohol for obvious reasons, as it had been used as varnish, it's been used in dyes and in fuel. However, unlike countries like England and Germany, the U.S. was also using it in small amounts in things like lemon or peppermint extracts, aftershaves, colognes, and witch hazel.
That's fine.
So it was already known about, as industrial alcohol. People just began to make it for the use of drinking alcohol, with typical ethanol now being threatened. And they were trying to find ways to make it less poisonous. Good luck. And they were also trying to add stuff to it to make it like, oh, this is alcohol, it's fine. So some were also buying alcohol in bulk before it became illegal, the actual drinking alcohol, and starting up like speakeasies and such. This is where the whole speakeasy thing came into play.
Yeah, man.
You'll remember this time being big for mobs, speakeasies, all that.
That's right.
Bootleggers.
That's right.
But they weren't safe from methyl alcohol either, as the supplies would start to dwindle eventually. Wood alcohol, methyl alcohol, later methanol, as it would be distilled further. When consumed, the body breaks it down to formic acid and formaldehyde. While methyl alcohol on its own is deadly, 2 tablespoons is enough to kill a child. Just methyl alcohol straight.
Wow.
Formic acid, which it's, one of its byproducts, is 6 times as deadly and is slow acting, so you won't even know you're dying for like a week.
Wow. I didn't realize how lethal this stuff was.
Symptoms of ingestion would include sudden weakness, abdominal pain, vomiting, blindness, unconsciousness, coma, and heart failure. Those who consumed it would basically feel sick from the methyl alcohol itself, seemingly recover, but then be poisoned later as it was metabolized into its byproducts. And the formic acid actually damages the optic nerve, which is where the blindness comes in. And it's permanent. So even if you survive, you could have permanent blindness. Similar damage is actually done to the parietal cortex, big in the vision department. And death typically occurs after lung tissue is damaged as well. So you can die from these things. Those who were not killed by this alcohol were often left permanently blind. One chemist, who I mentioned earlier, Dr. Alexander Gettler, he actually stated in 1918 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, "The prohibition by our government of the manufacture of distilled liquors will unquestionably lead to much moonshining, adulteration, and dilution of liquors offered to the public." He would also start to warn doctors of the signs of wood alcohol intoxication, because they were already starting to see deaths from this even before Prohibition went into effect, because they were already starting to do this.
Fun fact, I mentioned I grew up in fundamentalist church, and it was specifically Pentecostal charismatic type churches. The figurehead who basically led to the founding of Pentecostal charismatic culture is a guy named William Branham, who died in the 60s. But when he was a teenager, his family, his father and himself, they worked for a man named Otto Wathen in Jeffersonville, Indiana, in an illegal liquor operation during Prohibition. For some reason, the KKK hated liquor for whatever, they just pick and choose who they hate. But the KKK regularly engaged in vigilante justice of their own choosing. They raided Otto Wathen's illegal liquor still. William Branham himself, he's a teenager. He gets shot, and he's hospitalized. And for some reason, the KKK takes a liking to William Branham. They pay his hospital bills, and they buy him a brand new car. And that launched his evangelistic career.
Is this the same guy that like destroyed his liquor operation though?
He was working there.
Oh.
This is a liquor operation run by a man named Otto Wathen. Wathen supplied Al Capone in Chicago.
Yeah, Al Capone is actually an interesting figure, even because he's mentioned obviously throughout Prohibition, because
of course,
duh, but also like when Prohibition was starting to be seen as a failure, which I mean it was kind of a failure from the start. Like people would notice that Al Capone like had more money than the government did at this time, and so like he would actually put out these like soup kitchens for people who couldn't eat on Thanksgiving, while the government was like, I don't know what to do.
It's so sinister.
So you've got like Al Capone, who's known for all kinds of crimes. He's over here like helping the people that the government is like, well, we can't help you.
Yes, that's eerily similar to Pablo Escobar in Colombia.
It's interesting stuff how a lot of that came to be.
Do you remember where you were?
Of course I remember where I was.
Okay.
I always remember where I was. Just so you know, we have taken a break and it's been a full day.
Sorry.
It's been.
I bumped the desk and you looked at me like I kicked you.
It's been approximately 10 hours. It's been about 10 hours.
It's been 84 years.
Oh my God. And I currently have a drink on hand.
Ayo.
Because we are talking about
alcohol.
So if someone makes a reference to my drink, I am not drinking in the morning. Just wanted to.
No judgment from me. I mean,
Just wanted to make.
I've seen you in the morning sometimes.
You know what? Dealing with you, maybe I should start drinking in the morning. Anyway, so back to where we were. We were talking about poison.
Whatever. You have no idea where you were.
I do. I'm trying to get back into it. By the fall.
Pause. And you come in with poison.
Poison.
Okay. What's the title of the podcast?
By the fall of 1919, before Prohibition even took effect, more than 60 people in New York City had died. Another 100 had been blinded. 70 died in Connecticut Valley. 9 in Chicago, 15 in Cleveland, and 3 in Memphis, all from wood alcohol poisoning. This is before Prohibition even went into effect.
Methyl alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
This was only some of what had been documented, by the way. This isn't even all the numbers. This is just in those areas. Mm-hmm. There were more cases of blindness across the country as well. By December, over 50 more in Manhattan and surrounding areas were dead, and over 100 blinded just there. According to the National Committee for the Prevention of Blindness, thousands had been blinded by wood alcohol across the country at this point. Another man we have mentioned before, or let me just say Alexander Gettler, because I feel like we've talked about him a lot. His boss, Charles Norris, explained 1 teaspoon of wood alcohol is enough to cause blindness. Just a teaspoon.
It's lethal.
By his and Gettler's opinions, among others in their field, things would only get worse. So they were predicting like, okay, Prohibition is not only going to fail, it's actually going to cause a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. So, they were trying to warn like a lot of the physicians what to look out for in terms of wood alcohol poisoning.
Okay.
Now, Deborah Blum, the writer of the Poisoner's Handbook, she explains that supporters of Prohibition believed that when selling or drinking became illegal, people would just give it up, like the temperance movement peoples, right?
Sure.
They were like, well, when it becomes illegal,
don't drink.
When it becomes illegal, they'll just stop it.
Sure, it's human nature.
This obviously...
I love their naivety. It's so... Oh, God.
Yeah. This obviously did not happen. And in fact, more and more alcohol-related deaths and crimes were occurring. In Washington, D.C., police had reported an almost 10 times increase in DUIs.
10 times?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the wrong direction.
Yeah. The government's response to those breaking the law, apart from punishments with fines and imprisonment, was to basically purposely poison any alcohol so that it would be undrinkable. They thought like, well, you know what? We'll just make the alcohol they're trying to get even more poisonous. So maybe they'll stop drinking it that way. So they took the already industrial alcohol and they were like, we're going to tell everybody they have to add more like wood alcohol or methyl alcohol to it, as among other things. So
was the Attorney General just aware or around like what was happening? Like, how do you allow legally? You're poisoning people.
Well, you remember like a lot of people on Congress at this time were for
Well, they were dry.
Yeah.
Congress people. Wow.
This is how the 18th Amendment got passed in the first place.
Man.
So.
And I should honestly say, like, I'm making fun of their naivety. But honestly, where was sociology and psychology at this point? Did people really understand, hey, that's not how human behavior works?
I mean, Freud was doing cocaine. This is probably before this, but yeah.
Touche. I did not expect you to pull out a banger of a retort. But Freud doing cocaine, I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from New Hampshire.
And Freud would have been late 1800s, I think, right? Would it be like late 1800s? Anyway.
Yeah.
So, but not that far off. So here we are.
No.
But yeah, so people did still drink it because, and honestly, some people had no idea that anything extra was being added because it's not like there was this like news going out like across social media or anything. They didn't have social media, so like some people just didn't know. But they just continued drinking. Yeah. So this alcohol was basically being denatured as ordered by the government. So a lot of the alcohol that was being sold and consumed by the mid-20s was stolen industrial alcohol. So it was already methyl alcohol. So it's already poisonous. And a lot of people were like these people that were running speakeasies or bars or people who were selling alcohol at this time, like under the table. They were basically getting this stolen stuff, and whoever's buying it is not entirely sure what it is. So it's kind of a it's a throw of the dice.
But their target was the consumer. Like if we add this, it will deter alcohol consumption. That's their idea.
The government?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it didn't, but
it wasn't targeting the illegal trade of alcohol.
I mean, it could have been both, because if they stop buying it, then people will stop selling it, because what's the point in stealing it or buying it off someone else?
Sure.
But this actually affected people who were. This actually affected low-income people a lot too, like those who were homeless or people who were poor at this time. Because if you were spending, the more you spent on the alcohol, the better the product would have been. Still would have been somewhat poisonous, but it would have been more diluted with other things.
All right.
Or like
I feel like you told me about this a while back, and you mentioned that the poor and homeless were more vulnerable to this.
Yeah, well, this and probably adulteration of food otherwise.
I mean, so many ways to die. Dumb ways to die.
Anyway, so, but yeah, they, like those who, there were also chemists being hired by some of these bootleggers and such, like who would try to make it less poisonous. Still, maybe it may have been still somewhat poisonous, but maybe less than it would have been.
But they were taking matters in
they were trying
to purify the product.
Trying to.
I mean, I respect it.
But yeah. So, but remember, methyl alcohol is cheaper, so they're going to sell that stuff to the people who don't have as much money. Yeah. So, the government had already made it a requirement that those in these industries denature their alcohol that was put into products. Like this was a thing, and this was already happening in 1906 onward. So even before the Prohibition, like if it was industrial alcohol, they're making sure that like if they were using it for industrial purposes, it had to be denatured. So what they would do is they would just add more wood alcohol than usual, or just make it taste awful by adding bitter type compounds. Now, during the Prohibition, bootleggers had their own wet supporting chemists, like I mentioned, trying to tackle the poisons found in an already poisonous mixture, right?
Okay.
Now, the dry peeps in Congress...
The dry peeps.
They decided that if people were still going to break the law, they would just make alcohol even more poisonous. They literally had experiments going on to make this a thing, including adding even more methyl alcohol and other chemicals such as benzene, kerosene, and brucine.
Oh my God.
Which, if you remember, brucine is related to strychnine.
I forgot that. I definitely recognize benzene. We've mentioned that compound many times.
Yeah. It became benzene was probably in other things at this point too.
Well, of course, wouldn't it?
It became a requirement to double the amount of methyl alcohol in industrial alcohol formulas, and if that didn't work, then to more than triple or quadruple it. When later analyzed, many bottles and speakeasies, or even being carried by those who had simply died in the street, like they would just take it out of their pocket and test what was being drank, showed methyl alcohol as well as mixtures of ingredients such as gasoline, benzene, cadmium, iodine, zinc, mercury salts, nicotine, ether, formaldehyde, chloroform, camphor, carbolic acid, quinine, and acetone.
That's all bad.
Yeah.
Nothing you said is anything I want.
No. Now, speakeasies were huge, as I said earlier, and wood alcohol more prevalent because, yeah. And in 1919, a year before Prohibition went into effect, Cleveland had like 1,200 legal bars, right? This is before Prohibition went in. According to a digital history article.
1,200?
Yeah, this was legal.
That's a lot of bars.
Yeah. Well, I told you it was a big part of the culture, right? Drinking.
Wow.
So, according to this digital history article on digitalhistory.uh.edu, mind you, by 1923, this is when Prohibition was in effect, the city had an estimated 3,000 illegal speakeasies, along with 10,000 illegal stills. An estimated 30,000 city residents sold liquor during Prohibition, and another 100,000 made home brew or bathtub gin for themselves and friends.
Bathtub gin. Let's go.
In 1927, there were an estimated 30,000 illegal speakeasies, twice the number of legal bars before Prohibition. So, in 1926, in one hospital in New York alone, 716 people had been treated for alcoholic hallucinations, blindness, or paralysis. 61 of those 716 died, and this was all acute poisoning. This wasn't even the chronic.
There's nothing cute about it, if you ask me.
No. Okay. Now, Charles Norris had listed that in 1918, deaths due to chronic alcoholism, this is before Prohibition, was about 87. By the end of 1927, it would be over 700 deaths. So people were not only drinking more than before, they were drinking a more poisonous option, obviously.
Perfect.
And yeah. So Gettler, Alexander Gettler, our chief toxicologist I've been talking about.
Yeah.
Echoing Charles Norris, the medical examiner, would later tell newspapers in the area that in 1926 alone, around 1,200 people in New York City had been made sick, blind, or both, and hundreds had died, especially in the Manhattan areas. And this is just in one place. He would also say the figures, this is a quote from him, the figures exceed the number who died from alcoholism in the days of the saloon. It is impossible to estimate the effect which this poison liquor has had on the nervous systems of those taking it and who are not made ill enough to be brought to the hospital for treatment. It is clear enough, however, that the liquor which contains enough poison to kill so many is slowly but surely killing many others.
It's so just catastrophic.
On that note,
what's the recourse? Like, I'm familiar with what, people who become disabled now can do, but what is the recourse for a person who's been blinded as an adult?
Yeah, I mean,
and
this is permanent.
Yes.
Damage. I mean, it's.
Yeah, there's no Social Security or disability benefit. Like, you're basically false to your family to keep you
if your family's around.
Yeah,
if you have family.
Mercy.
Dry advocates simply blamed those who had died, saying they should never have consumed it, and they were basically facing justice from breaking the law. It's very lacking in compassion. Very cruel way to look at it, if you ask me.
This is before we had what would be described as a litigious society where legal action could protect the populace.
Yeah,
to a degree.
well, yeah. I mean, there are things that are still pretty bad that I feel like not many people get to see. Like when I worked in the VA, there was a lot of crazy
Yeah,
stuff.
we're not without our imperfections
Right.
and flaws and issues and such. But like at that time, it's like, well, just file a class action lawsuit. Nobody had heard of that.
Well, the thing is, can you afford the lawyers?
Of course.
Even today, I mean, it's,
Yeah, there's no precedent
right.
for even awarding enough damages to make it
Yeah.
plausible.
Like, yeah. And if no one was really advocating for you,
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't care about these people.
Obviously not.
So, wet advocates tried to get a law passed in 1927 to stop the government from adding extra poison to industrial alcohol, but it did not go through.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Charles Norris would go on to say that the government knows it is not stopping drinking by putting poison in alcohol, and that they must be charged with the moral responsibility for the deaths that poisoned liquor causes, although it cannot be held legally responsible. So,
bro.
He also argued that this use of one group's beliefs on the rest of society would never be moral.
Oh, dear.
Something I think still needs to be learned today.
That doesn't have any current application at all.
Well, that's something that I think humans have struggled with for a long time.
Oh, of course.
That, one's beliefs should take over the rest of society.
Of course.
So
because that's exactly what happens with ideological pluralism in societies.
I mean, isn't that what we talked about? Like, was it last weekend when we talked about some of those religious wars?
Yes, we did. The Borgias.
They would just rather kill the other side.
Just eliminate them. It's fine.
It's crazy.
We will win by killing everyone that disagrees.
Not cool, y'all.
And that's how we will bring Chex Notes peace.
And then the history is written by the winners. History
is written by the people who were not massacred.
And then no one really wins because history repeats itself.
Mm.
Okay, moving. I'm gonna get on so many. I'm gonna get on.
Deep.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Big brain stuff.
Okay. Justice. Okay. Now, Prohibition, or what President Herbert Hoover would call the noble experiment.
The vacuum guy?
Not that guy. I mean, no, not that guy. Prohibition was obviously failing and causing more problems. Only 7 years into Prohibition, 50,000 people had died of adulterated liquor, and many more had gone blind or been paralyzed from it. One adulterated beverage that had the name Ginger Jake, or Jamaican ginger. I'm going to get it. There's a point.
Okay.
The original Jamaican ginger was an old medicine. You see
You guys can't see the air quotes that Becca is using.
I'm making with my
client.
I say that because this was essentially ginger flavored alcohol that they called medicine. There was a lot of medications that were just 60% alcohol. And I guess if you can't feel it, I guess you think it's gone.
It must be working.
Right. So
that's so funny. I just love seeing the old school, these ancient labels on, bottles of medicine. And it's 77% cocaine.
Well, they didn't have to tell you what was in it either, because this is before.
No, they just,
because we talked about food.
There's no federal regulation on that.
We talked about food adulteration a couple weeks ago.
We did.
And they were fighting to get ingredients put on foods and drinks and things.
Mm-hmm.
It was a thing. People didn't want to do it.
No.
They won't tell you what was in it.
Mm-mm.
So.
Where's the beef?
Oh, after Prohibition went into effect, makers of this so-called medicine were ordered to reduce the alcohol and up the ginger so that it would abide by the laws. This lost them money, though. So some companies did the opposite of what they were ordered to do. So they would spike the products with more alcohol, but they would end up losing their license if they were caught,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. The ingredients were pretty awful, to be honest, including carbolic acid and such. Then later, a plasticizer called triocresyl phosphate, which is commonly used in photographic film to keep it from going brittle. So it's not really made to be.
Why does this sound like a dumb idea?
It is a dumb idea.
Okay.
This proved economical as well, since it could be easily stolen from places like Kodak. This plasticizer was combined with denatured alcohol, which formed an organophosphate. So.
Okay.
I was expecting you to be like, oh my God, chemistry. What is it? Organic chemistry.
No, that is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just I was tripped up by it could easily be stolen from Kodak, so
Yeah.
we
So
move forward.
now this combination provided a hell of a buzz, but it's also neurotoxic. People drinking this stuff would end up with something called Jake leg, which was basically the sudden paralysis of the legs. I mean, it can also be your arms too, but they called it Jake leg because there was this thing called a Jake walk. And the Jake, yeah, it was bad. The Jake walk looked like they were raising their foot high and the toes would just flop downward. So it would cause each step to like land very awkwardly.
Like the tibialis anterior was disengaging.
This combination was also damaging nerve cells in the spinal cord, mainly the motor neurons, causing similar damage to those suffering from ALS.
That's awful.
Yeah.
It sounds like foot drop when you describe the toes flopping. Yep.
Now, some cases were also known as Jake foot, Jake-itis, Jake-paralysis, and gingerfoot. That's what they called it like that on the, other people just gave it that name.
Now he's got the gingerfoot, see?
Oh my gosh.
Is this where jaywalking comes from?
I'm not actually sure. But it's Jake walk, so we should look that up.
Great question from our friend Aaron, who is in the room at the moment, who also made the cover art for the podcast. Ayo.
Whoop, whoop. So, sorry, I needed my margarita for a minute.
Is there any methyl alcohol in that? Okay. Are you blind?
No, I'm not blind.
Okay.
Although, I don't know, I do have some astigmatism.
Okay.
Now, around 1930, there were more than 2,000 cases of this, Jake-itis, Jake leg going on. And
it feels like you're making them up.
I'm not making them up. There were more than 2,000.
Jake-a-rooney. The Jake's, the two-step, the two Jake step.
Oh, gosh. Whatever it was bad. There's more than 2,000 cases of this in Mississippi and as much in Kansas and hundreds in Kentucky, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Georgia, Texas. There was even a few in like Rhode Island and Massachusetts. So yeah. Some bootleggers were also using this toxic combo in bottles disguised as perfumes. So that they would sell it under the table like, here's your perfume you ordered. Right?
Wink, wink.
Yeah. It was around this time as well that blues songs depicting victims of Ginger Jake were circulating. Like there would be blues songs talking about, he's got that Jake walk, like such and such is crying because he's blind and he can't walk. Or it was crazy.
Wow.
So it was pretty well known. Mm-hmm. So as we know, things got crazy towards the end of 1929. Do you remember why?
Great Depression.
On October 29th, 1929, the stock market went under and the depression soon to follow. It was was it Black Tuesday?
Yes.
It's called, yeah. This was actually what set in motion the end of Prohibition because all of the tax revenue on alcohol could have really helped out at this point. So it's not that the government cared so much about people dying as they did.
They needed money.
We need some money.
It was really the catalyst for that, huh?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Now, before the crash, dry supporters were pretty optimistic that Prohibition would easily last, like despite its critics and difficulty to enforce, because it was pretty difficult to enforce when you got people bootlegging and stuff. Things really started to change, however, while in the Depression. Those who had once been on Team Dry were actually moving over to Team Wet, including teetotaler John D. Rockefeller Jr.
Really? Why?
I mean, he's a rich guy.
Is fast. Well, yeah, but I mean, somebody that powerful and who's a gatekeeper, like him flipping sides is a huge deal.
Yeah. Alfred P.
He's probably financially motivated, let's be
Probably.
honest.
Alfred P. Sloan of General Motors.
Okay.
And Harvey Firestone, the tire guy.
The tire guy.
That guy. Now, I had to look up, and you saw me looking this up, like the different presidents that were.
Yeah.
The people that were president, together. Yeah. At this point, Franklin Roosevelt would take office in 1933. So we have gone from Woodrow Wilson at the beginning of this whole thing to Roosevelt taking office in 1933. Now, in between those, there's like Coolidge, Hoover, Harding. Who else was there? another dude or two. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not about this. So now, during his campaign, Franklin Roosevelt promised to end prohibition because he had originally liked the idea when it was about to start, when prohibition was like brand new, but later came to the conclusion that it wasn't working and it just wasn't honest, like to take rights away from the people like that, I guess, because it was, it's
interesting.
In a way, you are taking away the rights from others because of another person's moral beliefs. I mean, like, yes, alcohol
It's true.
is considered a poison,
Mm-hmm.
but if you could just, I mean, like, they could have just regulated saloons better, where it's like, hey,
Well, they're ignorantly, again, there's general ignorance of how alcoholism actually affects a person and why it affects a person. And they think that they're oversimplifying the issue by saying, well, we'll just make it illegal.
Yeah.
They act as if the issue is way more simple than it actually is. It's so much more complex than just...
And if you've never had an addiction or you've never known somebody with an addiction, you're not going to understand how hard it is to get off of something like that, because it is affecting your central nervous system. This is an addictive substance.
Sure. And at that point in, American society, there was no such thing as drug rehabs or alcohol rehabs or Alcoholics Anonymous or what have you, because, like you mentioned, the Washingtonian society that really was an addiction support group, but they devolved into, political interest and infighting and such, which was unfortunate. But again, the collective understanding of addiction in general is what allowed for a foolish solution like prohibition to be brought to the table.
Because they're blaming the people who are dead. They're like, well, they did it. It's like, well, you don't seem to understand that they need help getting off of this instead of just taking it completely away. Because if someone's going through withdrawals like DTs, you can die from DTs.
Yeah, I can tell you so again, I've mentioned I grew up in fundamentalist religion. We had a meeting at the church of all of these small group leaders for the youth ministry. The senior pastor of the church, who was in his mid to late 60s at this point, and he wants to have a meeting with all of us to talk about why drinking alcohol under any circumstance is wrong.
But Jesus drank wine.
Jesus drank wine. Let's I mean,
he made it, right?
Of course. And it was just the strangest circumstance in the world, because I was a little older. I'm college age, but every other person in there was like high school age. And it's like, you're 50 years older than everyone else in this room. Alcohol is not the issue they're dealing with today. Like, you are descending from the mountaintop to bring some piece of wisdom to all of these young people, and you choose to talk about alcohol. And I understand it can be an issue for teenagers, but like, you don't even know what century this is. Like, it was so disconnected from reality. It was hysterical. He felt like a prohibitionist. It was so strange.
He was a dry.
I was like, and now I look back at all those situations, like, why did we pay that guy? Like, he didn't, there was nothing.
You dry. I'm just kidding. But I feel like too, people who get addicted to alcohol, or who kind of find themselves pulled into alcoholism, a lot of them start with like other mental health issues, and like this is their way that, it starts as a sort of self-medicating thing. Because I remember when I was in my early 20s, I drank way too much, and I did it because that was like my way to, cause I didn't know how to mask. Like, when I went out to be around people,
well, you didn't know that
like, that was the way
ADHD.
that was the way that I was trying to get out of my head in order to actually be around people.
100%.
Was it the right way to do it? No, but I didn't know.
Work.
I did. Yeah, I did.
Yes.
But it's also, it's probably not great for my health. But
no,
were there other ways? Yeah. Should I have probably?
That's another thing I was going to bring up about, being a totally square church kid. I was always taught regarding alcohol specifically, like, it is evil. It is, witchcraft and whatever. And I never actually understood, like, alcohol actually kind of works, buddy.
I mean, yeah.
Like, it can be abused, of course.
Well, yes.
But like,
so can many
people
things.
do it. I never understood why anyone would drink. And the truth is because It takes the edge off, dude.
Those
the same reason people
people
smoke cigarettes. It takes the edges off, man.
Those same people drank coffee like nobody's business. And I know caffeine is not the same thing as alcohol. I get that.
Yeah.
But it's like, but caffeine is also an
They were
addiction.
substance dependent.
Yes. Like they had a coffee connection. That's what it was called. Yeah. And like, it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever known because I like coffee, but I don't like connection. Okay? I don't like connection.
But when she met me, she liked connection again. There you go.
Well, we were talking about all kinds of cool facts. You were different. You were different.
Yeah,
you were sitting down with a cup of coffee at 8 a.m. with me going, how are you? Where's your heart? How's your heart doing?
How's your heart?
I'm like, it's beating. I mean, my heart's beating.
You're like, it's beating too slow because I don't have this caffeine in me. Can you shut up?
Right? I mean, okay. Anyway, moving on.
Fun.
Moving on. Moving on. We need to move on from that. Okay. Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt.
Okay.
Beetlejuice.
Okay.
He had promised to end Prohibition. Okay.
Beetlejuice promised it? No. Roosevelt. Okay.
I mean, Beetlejuice probably would too.
True.
Think about it. But yeah, so he won by a landslide. According to Daniel Okrentz, I keep saying OK Rent because that's how I would spell his name. Okrentz Last Call. He wrote this book called Last Call. It's a great historical narrative of Prohibition.
You're reading that?
Yeah, it's really good. Very happy Louis Martini of Napa Valley wine fame. He did not make the martini, I don't think. His last name just happened to be Martini.
Missed opportunity.
I know. I looked at it. I was like, did he create the martini? And I couldn't find any evidence that he did. So
okay.
But he was big and he had his own winery and stuff. He was really big in the wine business. He tied the steam whistle at his winery down for a full 15 minutes to express his joy when Roosevelt won, because he knew that, he's going to help overturn this whole thing, right? And this is interesting. This is also when Anheuser-Busch's board of directors authorized $15,000 to buy a team of Clydesdales for their ads.
Get out of here.
This goes all the way back to
that's when that originated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, FDR, Roosevelt, whatever you want to call him, was sworn in March of 1933. That's when they were doing it then, I guess. We do it in January?
Yes. If it was at the beginning of 33, that means he won the election of 32. I believe that's how it works. Mm-hmm.
So, and Congress was repopulated with wet members. That just sounds weird. I'm sorry. But whatever. He first passed the Cullen-Harrison Act later that month in February, legalizing beers with an alcohol content of 3.2% and wines of similar low alcohol content, kind of getting the ball rolling.
Oh, they're easing back in.
And honestly, it's probably the best way to do it, because if you're just like, everybody's gonna be go crazy again.
It's true. That's kind of shrewd on their part. Yeah. I respect it.
So, and I have to say, the drinking was a problem before Prohibition. It's just they did not handle it correctly with Prohibition.
Yeah.
Ending it like that, and then now you got people coming in with poison alcohol, and the government being like, "Yeah, let's add more poison to it. That'll stop them." It just didn't work. It was a failure.
I have to remind myself at that time, when Prohibition was enacted, there was no middle class. And we have the Industrial Revolution. So there's simply the exploitation of the working class, and you have the ruling class. There's only two classes.
Well, you've got, and people were drinking with every meal. But it was I can't imagine the level of mental health problems going on. The amount of depression, the amount of anxiety, the amount of, am I going to eat today?
Yeah.
For sure. So I'm sure things are rough, mentally speaking. So, yes, the Cullen-Harrison Act. Then Prohibition finally came to an complete end with the 21st Amendment being ratified on December 5th, 1933, officially repealing the 18th Amendment. And this is the first time I think that had been done, to an amendment of the Constitution.
To repeal?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, the Prohibition lasted about 14 years in total and did a significant amount of damage. It was a complete failure anyway, because it just wasn't enforceable, especially once the Depression hit. I mean, there were people in the government that were getting bootlegger liquor. You know what I mean? Like they were.
I love that so much.
So it's not like, yeah. I'm sure that's the ones that were not into extra poisoning it, but you know, whatever. But the government effectively poisoned its own citizens, trying to get them to obey and conform to others' ideals when they could have found other ways to regulate saloons and help those dealing with alcoholism and such. Now, I know we didn't know that much about what was going on, but it feels like at this point you've also got, you've just come out of the, World War I, you know, the chemists' war, basically. We're doing a lot of studies on poisons and chemistry and stuff. And it's like, but we can't, I don't know, donate some time to figure out what's going on with the alcoholism situation or mental health or anything.
Yeah.
You know,
I
like
think the tactics lagged far behind the technology in World War I.
But we knew how to make some, you know, chemical and all kinds of weapons. Still, the movement for suffrage was helped along by it. So there's some silver lining, I suppose, but I feel like we could have done that without all this. Now, the end of Prohibition, though, came about more because of money, tax revenue loss, organized crime getting out of hand, and the inability to efficiently enforce the laws than because of morality or sympathy to those becoming blind, disabled, or
so
those
much.
dying.
The world moves forward because of virtue? No, money.
Which is really sad to me. Who knows how long Prohibition would have lasted had the Depression, an equally unfortunate time period, mind you, had not made others desperate to end it.
It's a great question. We'll never know.
Yeah. I mean, the Depression was equally horrible. Don't get me wrong.
And the biggest thing that got the U.S. out of the Depression was the World War.
The next one.
Right.
Yeah. And you have to remember, too, this is around the same time as during and after World War I, you've got the Spanish flu epidemic.
What, 1918?
Yeah, so there's and like I've said this before, but like I know we as millennials we're always talking about like, oh, you know, there's always something unprecedented happening.
That's right.
And it's like, yeah, it feels that way, but I feel like that's not too uncommon because like some of these people lived through World War I, the Spanish flu epidemic, Prohibition, Depression, another World War. Like
heck of a time to be alive.
You know, things have been crazy before.
Yeah.
Now I want to mention one case, because you know I love my true crime.
Please.
This is a really short case.
Please.
But I really want to talk about it.
Okay.
Mike Malloy, or Mike the Durable, as he was called.
Okay.
Mike was a patron of a speakeasy run by Tony Marino in the 1920s.
Tony Marino.
1920s, 1930s. Now he was, Mike was an Irish immigrant who was homeless at this point, and he was also an alcoholic. He had once been a firefighter and had also worked as a stationary engineer at one point. Something to do with machines.
Okay.
So in 1933, things were really rough for Tony and his friends being Joseph Murphy, Francis Pasqua, Hershey Green. That just sounds like a clue. Like, it sounds like a, yeah. Anyway, and
it was Mr. Green in the library with the candlestick.
Actually, it was a taxi cab in this, but
okay.
And Daniel Kreisberg, they decided they needed money quick and devised this plan to trick Mike into getting a life insurance plan so they could kill him. They were just sitting around one day and they're like, you know what we could do? Kill Mike.
Unbelievable.
So they chose Mike because they assumed no one would miss the guy since he was homeless, usually drunk, and had no family. Pretty awful. They got the temporary policy using a different name than Malloy's somehow. I'm guessing things were a little more lax back in the day. They used the name Nicholas Mellery. The policy was for about $3,500, but today's money would be about $82,000. Still, like, you're going to kill this guy and share this amount of money. It just doesn't. Anyway. They then proceeded to attempt to get Mike to drink himself to death by giving him a lot of free booze, which he accepted. Okay. We're talking about like a lot of the kind of poisoned booze too. It's kind of diluted at the speakeasy, but not, I mean, you know. When this did not kill him, he was likely tolerant at this point because he'd been drinking a lot. Tony began to put antifreeze in the alcohol he gave him. This did not kill him either, possibly because any ethanol that would have been in the stuff he was drinking blocks the absorption of ethylene glycol, which is the main poison in antifreeze, in the liver. Now, Tony then tried, is it turpentine?
Yeah. Paint thinner.
Turpentine, horse liniment, and rat poison. Next, he just gave him straight shots of wood alcohol, basically. And then he tried giving him oysters soaked in the wood alcohol.
Okay.
Then they gave him a sandwich made of spoiled sardines, rat poison, and carpet tacks. And he ate it. He ate all of it. When this failed, they decided to stop giving him alcohol and food because it was costing them money.
You sure? They've spent like $600 by now.
And they decided that they were going to get him knockout drunk this time, but they were going to throw him out into the snow in this park and then throw like 5 gallons of water on him. They were trying to freeze him to death. But he was found and rescued by police soon after and taken to a shelter, basically.
Mm-hmm.
After this, you can see why he's called Mike the Durable. After this, Hershey Green, the guy I was talking about earlier, he happened to be a taxi driver. So they decided to run him over, going like 45 miles per hour. This is 72 kilometers per hour if you're not from here. Because America and our we don't do the metric system because
no, of course not.
We don't like change.
That would make too much sense.
This put him in the hospital with some broken bones for 3 weeks, but he walked back into the tavern super alive later. They thought he was dead. They thought he was dead.
You said super alive.
He was super alive.
He was way alive.
He came back in looking for more booze. Okay. On February 22nd, it's the day after my birthday, by the way. They waited for him to pass out from drinking. Then they put him in Joseph Murphy's, one of the friends' rooms. Then they put a hose leading to a coal jet into his mouth before turning it on. This finally killed him because it was carbon monoxide, basically poisoning. And they got a doctor, talked a doctor into signing off that it was pneumonia before having him quickly buried, right?
Okay.
Someone apparently couldn't keep their mouth shut, though. Because rumors began spreading about this whole scheme and about Mike the Durable. There were all these stories coming about, right? Police heard about the rumors and decided to have the body exhumed to investigate. They're like, okay, this sounds fishy. All 5 men were charged with murder, and the doctor who signed the death certificate was charged as an accessory. Marino, Kreisberg, and Pasqua were executed via electric chair June 7th, 1934, and Murphy was executed via electric chair July 5th, of that year. Excuse me. Green somehow got imprisonment for a minimum of 10 years. Maybe he had a better lawyer. I don't know. He's the one that like had the taxi that they ran him over with.
I'm shocked by that.
And the doctor was convicted of a misdemeanor for failing to report the crime, basically. So,
love it.
There you go. And like I feel really bad for Mike, but his story lives on. Mike the Durable.
His story is durable.
It is. As it should be. Poor guy.
True. That's exploitation of someone for sure.
But I'm glad justice was found for him.
Totally. All right. That's going to do it for this episode, folks. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.